Hi, Grant.
Hi, Shireen. Salam alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Hi, Yasin.
Salam, Shireen.
So, we would like to welcome you guys to our webinar today. Grant has been contributing with us many times, and each time it has been always value add and good learning experience. So today we are super excited to have Yasin for the first time with us. So we would like to welcome everyone who's joining us, and let's start. Grant, floor is yours.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Shireen. And I think I was looking at the number of this webinar. I think it's 215. I actually remember, I'm not sure if it was me or if I attended that webinar, but I remember the 100 webinar, which was quite a while ago. And I know it's every Saturday that you do this. So fantastic work from the Symbios-Consulting team. So just before we get into the presentation itself and introduce ourselves in more detail, I just wanted to reflect on a couple of quotes that I recently saw related to doing business or working with supply chains in the continent of Africa. And I just really want to quickly mention three of those quotes that I had come across recently. The one is from Aliko Dangote. He's Africa's richest man at the moment. He also founded Dangote Group, and this is in Nigeria. And he stated, "You cannot industrialize without solving the supply chain challenges. We must produce what we consume, build logistics that connect Africa to itself." The other interesting quote that I read was from Paul Kagame, who's the president of Rwanda. Rwanda is a very interesting economy in Africa at the moment, something like 6 to 7% growth year on year, GDP growth, and also per capita growth, and a lot of investment happening there. But he said recently, "Our continent's development depends on how effectively we trade with one another. Regional supply chains are the foundation of a prosperous, self-reliant Africa." And then the third quote that I want to mention here really quickly is Akinwumi Adesanya. He's the president of the African Development Bank. And he said, "Africa must not be a warehouse of raw materials. We must build competitive value chains supported by modern infrastructure to create wealth and jobs on the continent." And all of those three statements resonate for one thing for me, and that's the linkages between Africa supporting itself. So much less focus on a European country, the US, or any other place creating the economic conditions for success within Africa, but rather for Africa to do it for itself. And that's a very interesting topic and concept related to this topic. So let me quickly present my screen. Let me make sure that you can see. There we go. Let's go right to the beginning. That's a great idea. So I'd like to just, first of all, just quickly introduce myself, and then I'll hand over to Yasin to introduce himself. But my name is Grant Swanepoel, Director of Strategy and Alliances, Europe, Middle East, and Africa for the Association for Supply Chain Management. And as Shireen had mentioned, we work very closely with Symbios-Consulting on a range of supply chain improvement topics, including training, learning and development, and also some really cool projects as well. So looking forward to the session with Symbios and my colleague Yasin. Over to you, Yasin.
Thanks, Grant, and thank you as well, Shireen, for having me. Thank you to Symbios Consulting. Looking forward to this discussion. But my name is Yasin, founder and CEO of the Circular Economy Institute of Africa. Have an academic training in supply chain and logistics. Previously worked as a management consultant at Carney, where I worked on multiple gas and oil projects, a mining project, as well as some other consumer goods projects throughout Africa and some in the Middle East. But looking forward to presenting on this really exciting topic.
Thanks, Yasin. And then maybe continue with that thought of, what's happening in Africa. Let's get started a bit. And everybody, I just want to remind everyone in the audience to take out your phones, because we will have a few polls during this session as well that we'd ask you to snap us QR code for. So just get ready with those phones. Over to you, Yasin.
Yeah, great. So before we get into some of the details of this presentation, let's just start with a quick knowledge check. So here's a question. Roughly what share of Africa's total trade happens within the continent? So I'm sure there should be a QR code there available there for them. Grant, is there?
Yeah, there should be. I'm just checking out what's happened. Let's just see it right when I wanted to present it. Went off.
Can you add can you add the link to the chat so people can click on it? Because if someone is
there should be a QR code here, actually, but I could just copy it over for sure.
Someone is using her or she, if anyone is using his or her phone, it might be difficult to scan QR codes. So can you add the link?
Yep,
sure,
send it to the chat.
Perfect.
And I'm sure we'll see some of the live results in the moment. I think this will be a great litmus test for how Africa's supply chain story is often perceived versus the reality.
For sure. Even those AI bots out there, if you could also just take part in this. This poll, I see there's quite a few.
We'll give it a couple more seconds. Grant, can we see how many people have replied to the poll? Can we?
That would have been a great thing for me to do, Yassine, but I did not actually include that there. So
No, it's
unfortunately not. Counting them, it's like about five or so at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, no problem. We'll give it another minute and then we can move forward.
So please vote.
Sure.
Even if you don't know, just make a try.
Yeah, we're not testing you on this. You're not graded on this.
Interesting.
Okay, great.
يعني عايزين اشتراككم حتى لو مش عارفين الإجابة بس نحاول مع بعض.
So see the majority of you have voted 30%. The answer is 16%, right? 16% of Africa's total trade actually happens within the continent, which is a clear indicator.
It's
right?
my vote. Yassine, I did it.
Yeah.
I'm successful. I wrote this.
Okay, great.
15%.
Amazing. Yeah. So I mean, I think as we get into the presentation and as we start to look at the challenges and opportunities, we'll really start uncovering, like why this is. So, Grant, over to the next slide, please. So, understanding why Africa's supply chain narrative is misunderstood, right? So, firstly, global headlines tend to focus on risk, conflict, poverty, and instability, rather than the enormous opportunities that do exist, right? So there is this negative portrayal of Africa as a business landscape to operate in. When people talk about Africa, which is the second point, there's often usage of aggregate statistics, right? So they really blur the reality that we're really talking about 54 countries that each have their own unique operating environments, cultures, market regulations, and capabilities themselves. And then thirdly, there's this economic paradox that Africa holds some of the world's fastest growing economies, yet it ranks fairly low on global trade integration metrics. And finally, many organizations tend to come in and enter the market with replica models. Something that we'll be diving into later is they simply try to copy and paste what worked in Europe, in Asia, in the Gulf, instead of adapting to local ecosystems. That's often where strategies break down and where there's often a failure in market entry.
Yeah, thanks for that, Yassine, and also just to maybe support some of the information with some numbers as well. So thanks for putting these metrics. There's 4 key metrics that we want to just draw your attention to for the purposes of this discussion. The first one is related to youth. So 60% of the population in Africa is under the age of 25. Now, this is in quite a big contrast to Europe, to places in Asia, and many other economies around the world. And of course, we'd like to put a positive spin on this. I mean, there is some negatives of that because, experience, being many years in a job, ensuring that you've had time to be educated, and all those different factors do count for a lot. But what's the potential upside of that is that there is a large talent pool. And I was actually in a conversation the other day with an organization in Rwanda. And these were young people in Rwanda, and they're very aware and familiar of what AI is. They totally get it. And I think it's almost as if we're not tainted yet with the concerns around things like AI, right? Oh, it might take my jobs. It might, it might destroy, many things that I know already, because Africa is starting from a smaller base. And there is the opportunity right now to let people learn about these kinds of things. So there's a lot of digital opportunities. And I think the way that we see education is really a cornerstone to that. It brings me to the next point, which is smartphone users. So it's about smartphone usage, because smartphone is the primary way in which people in Africa access the internet, access information. If you think about many remote areas in the continent, really the only way that they have any kind of communication is through a smartphone. Sometimes not so smartphones, right? We still have many sort of old, I wouldn't say old Nokias. I think even though they last long, I don't think they're all still available, but there is high cell phone usage, and smartphones is definitely one of those. And there's currently 514 million smartphone users in the continent of Africa. That is expected to grow to 880 million by the year 2030. So that's in 6 years, right? That's an extremely quick growth. And this is a very high percentage, actually, of the total percentage of people in Africa. Now, the benefit of this, and you can look at this as a good case study to what we call leapfrogging. So the cell phone or mobile market in Africa was really one of the quickest growth areas compared to more established markets. And the reason for that was because they didn't start off with really good access to landline technology, to internet technology, traditional internet technology. It was really about smartphones just penetrating very quickly. So really this leapfrog into mobile business to consumer, as well as also a very important aspect. And we do see this very much in the form of payments platforms, applications, social media, and all of these kinds of things. I mean, wherever I go in Africa, honestly, people are on their phones the whole time, right? And it's those people with loud phones. So sometimes a little bit annoying, but they are looking at information constantly. So there's a perfect opportunity there to both educate and to inform people in Africa. So this is very interesting. The other one is intra-African trade. So within the continent of Africa, currently the number is at $208 billion in 2024. And that's actually a 7.7 growth year on year. Yes, percentage growth year on year. So there is a huge growth when you look at this. Yes, the base is small, but if the objective is to invest in infrastructure, to invest in supply chains, it actually is a good time, because you can expect a return on your investment. Now, it is very different in different regions in Africa. I mean, coming from South Africa, there's a bit of a stagnation right now, less than 1% growth. But many other economies, especially in West Africa and East Africa, and some Central African countries, are also seeing quite a lot of growth currently. The African Free Trade Agreement is really a big driver of this. So allowing for inter-country trade and movement of goods without any tariffs. And this is in contrast to what we're seeing elsewhere in the world currently. So this is really a key driver of that, and we'll keep in touch thinking about this free trade agreement and how this can impact supply chains. The last one there that I want to mention is infrastructure funding gaps. So currently there's in the region of $90 to $100 billion per year. That is actually a gap in funding that is needed, but is not closed. So this really does open the door to private sector openings and private sector investment in infrastructure. Now, the one thing that is potentially a hindrance in this is government policies and regulations around a lot of African governments that do like the idea of sort of the state being the funder of all of these things. But I think if we can unlock a little bit of that, there would be a lot more growth opportunity, and also the investment by private funders. A good example of this also is, again, in South Africa, where there's been a bit of stagnation over the years in terms of the rail network. And the government is now recently realized that by opening up the rail sector to private funders and private investors, there's really a lot of benefit that can come from that, and also a necessity, to be honest. So these are just some interesting stats for you. And again, as Yassine had mentioned, Africa is a massive place with very diverse and different objectives and opportunities. But in general, if we have to sum it up, this is what I think some key numbers would look like. Over back to you now, Yassine, for our second questionnaire.
Yeah, of course. Happy. So let's do another pulse check, right? So which one of these challenges feels like the biggest blocker for your organization in Africa? Your options are infrastructure, regulation, talent, data and tech, and then some political risks as well. So if you follow that QR code, it's the same link that we sent, in the chat. Really interested to see what your thoughts are and your feedback is. And while everyone is filling in this poll, I think just to double down on some of those key areas that you focused on, Grant. I think it reminds me of the panel that we hosted at SAPIC earlier this year, right? Focusing on that, addressing the skills gap in supply chain, particularly in South Africa, but I think that it's applicable to the rest of the continent. Is how can organizations that are operating on the continent effectively engage and mentor their young talent, right, to bring them through the ranks and to really educate them on supply chain topics more contextually for the continent, right? I think that's something that we need to keep in the back of our heads as well.
For sure. I mean, if I could choose one of I would actually choose all of them, to be honest. I think we should have had a rank versus a choice, to be honest, because actually all of these seem to be big blockers.
So I see it's between regulation and data and technology, right?
So far, it looks like we probably need a few more responses out there. What's happening?
Shireen, which option did you select?
Shireen?
Sorry, I'm on mute. I didn't. I maintained my luck. And I said, let's see. I'm happy with my luck. So I didn't share this down.
So yeah, I think it's still between regulation and data and technology, which is really interesting. No one's selected political risk yet.
Surprising.
I think
for me, it's political risk, of course.
Definitely. I mean, it's like a chicken and the egg kind of situation, right? Your political risk feeds into the regulation that's currently in place.
But you have people here participating from Middle East, from Saudi Arabia, from other current countries. So it's good. We have the exposure between supply chain in Africa and supply chain in Saudi. It's really good. Good discussion. Because a lot of supply chain problems in Saudi, from the western region in Saudi, Red Sea, is affected by problems happening.
Definitely. Well, I think, Rod, we can close out this poll, but just starting off the conversation, what do you think of the results? And I'm actually quite surprised that 75% of the audience selected regulation. I was expecting some sort of normal distribution between the five.
Actually, I would have expected the same, and I think it depends on whether we look at the outcome or the cause, because lack of infrastructure is really a cause of a problem that starts before that. Lack of talent is also a result, should I say, like a result of a specific cause. And I agree. I think political and probably regulation have a lot to do with what happens after that. Infrastructure, talent, data, technology is typically a function of those things. So it does typically start with that. But I also want to mention, Yassine, that a lot of it is, in some cases, is not really within the scope of being able to be impacted on that much, but rather to identify where the risk lies. And that in itself has got a lot of benefits as well, because then we can build agility in the supply chain to solve for some of the current risk that we do see. But interesting topic, and see there's a few more people have answered there.
No, definitely. I definitely
Right.
resonate with those points, but I think we can move on to the next point of discussion. So looking at some of the challenges, right? Political instability, I think, is a huge point of contention here, right? How can we as entrants, or how can we as people that are potentially entering Africa navigate the environment and understand like what the political instability is within that region, right? It's not specific to that country, but it's the surrounding countries as well, right? Secondly, we've got fragmented infrastructure. I mean, just the other day, I was, in another call with some potential investors, and was explaining to them that shipping a container from South Africa through to the DRC is not as easy as it seems, right? So, you get all the way up to Mozambique, and then past Mozambique, there's not really much of a road network heading into DRC. Secondly, is getting a container back full. Right. So you're sending goods out of these regions, but are you returning, or are you getting goods returned in full back to you? The next is regulatory patchwork. So, I mean, we discussed in the last poll, right? I think that there's a lot of mixed regulation between these different regions. I think it's been getting better in recent years with the recent collaborations and coalitions that have been formed, right? Trying to establish these unified frameworks and regulations that are applicable to multiple regions in Africa. Second, and then next is informal markets and cash, right? So I don't have statistics on me right now, but I can attest that outside of South Africa, economies are formally bound a lot by cash payments and through informal markets. I mean, was got strong family ties to Zimbabwe, and there's an informal trading post in Harare called Dombashawa, which is a huge informal market. The UN recently did a study that $2.5 billion flows through that market every single year, right? So you can just imagine the amount of money that flows through some of these informal trading posts throughout the region. And then next, like we've discussed previously, is talent gaps. How can we, as organizations and as businesses, tap into local talent, and how can we uplift communities that this talent is found in? And then we've discussed as well, right? Is dot tech and tech adaptation. I think a lot of the markets in Africa are still nascent; they're still developing. I mean, we've still dealing with the basic utility infrastructure, and now we've got a widespread adoption of generative AI in developed businesses, and everyone's running to try and integrate AI into their operations, but we're still trying to deal with the basics here on the continent. So I'm sure Grant can also attest to some of the challenges that he's had dealing with clients that are looking to kind of have those various integrations on the continent.
Absolutely. And I think I wanted to just talk on one quick one, the informal markets. I think it's such an interesting one, Yassine, because that really it's sort of that last mile impact, to be honest. I think that's where it impacts the supply chains the most. Yes, there are challenges when it comes to containerization, to shipping containers and bulk shipments to certain locations like towns and cities, but just outside of those locations, it becomes extremely informal and extremely rural. I remember my time working at Avon Cosmetics, actually, and in sub-Saharan Africa, it was like, delivering to a location was like around the tree next to the big rock. You'll find the house there. It's really that rural in some cases, and also reminds me of some of the global health supply chain work that we've done in Africa as ASCM. Where that last mile becomes extremely difficult and expensive. But there are some solutions to get around that. And one stat that I just want to mention on this is you can actually find a Coca-Cola in any small town in Africa, but you cannot find life-saving medication. And that is a supply chain failure. So that's just a very interesting statistic I wanted to mention. All right, so let's not be all doom and gloom, Yassine. Let's think of some of the opportunities that exist within this continent. The first one, and I know we touched on this briefly already, but the Africa Free Trade Agreement. So what the Africa Free Trade Agreement potentially opens up is really a massive single market of 1.4 billion consumers. The component of this that we do need to remember, though, is that Africa is extremely diverse. I mean, if you think of many of the people on this call are from Egypt or the Middle East, sometimes I'm not sure if Egypt is Africa or Middle East, to be honest. I do joke with Shireen every now and then that she's my African sister and I'm an African brother because we are from the same continent. But I think what's really clear is that it is not a one size fits all. But what agreements like this can do is help organizations and economies to not only be a raw material export only supply chain. We really do need to make it more than that, but hopefully through the demand creation on the demand and the consumer side, this will hopefully have an impact there as well. The other one that comes to mind is the leapfrog tech, right? So we did discuss this earlier, and one of the very good examples of this is what they do in Rwanda, where they use drones. This is particularly for the medical supply delivery service. So this provides medicines to clinics and hospitals around Kigali and other towns and cities in Rwanda. It's a very interesting topic. If you were to Google this or to look for it on YouTube, you'll probably find a bit more information on it, but very interesting what they're doing with that. And I mean, it makes the speed of delivery extremely fast. So it's very interesting. The other one is the blockchain cargo tracking pilot projects that they're doing in Kenya at the moment. So blockchain is an interesting technology that has actually been around for quite a while in supply chain, and the application works very well in supply chains versus other applications like digital cash and currency and things like that. But blockchain is extremely useful because we're operating in these different steps within a supply chain. But this is an example of what's happening there. The leapfrogging tech is also potentially I want to use the word there's less of an opportunity cost because you wouldn't have invested in the previous infrastructure already. So although the infrastructure is not yet there, now investing in new, much more advanced infrastructure negates the need to invest in the interim infrastructure that would be needed before that, if that makes sense. So that's really a semi-benefit if we can get to that point. Another one is localization. So if you're listening here today from Saudi Arabia, you'll be very familiar with the Saudi localization strategy. That's part of Vision 2030. And obviously, one of the components of that is about educating local individuals and ensuring that localized jobs are created. So there is some examples of this where we have auto hubs. South Africa and Morocco are very good examples of that, where we produce vehicles and components for vehicles. These are hubs that are, for example, already exporting to Europe, to North America, etc. And one of the reasons for that is because there's a benefit from a cost of labor perspective. One negative of that is the distance to the market, but there are other elements. If we can leverage those things and localize certain aspects of those economies, Africa can really benefit from that. The other one I want to mention under localization very quickly is just related to, again, the raw material piece. So it's unfortunate that what typically happens is a lot of raw materials come from Africa. Africa is a very rich continent when it comes to that. Let me use lithium as an example with electric vehicles, right? It's very common right now, and you can see it where the majority of components that go into those batteries for electric vehicles actually come from, or those raw materials actually come from Africa. So it's a very interesting way to see it, but Africa doesn't import any of that back, right? Or very little of that back. In the case where there's electronics or other sort of very advanced products that Africa uses, most of that is imported, right? So I think the real opportunity is about localizing the manufacturing and the value-adding activities that exist within the supply chain. So the youthful workforce, so this is where there is an opportunity, even though we do have very high unemployment in the continent of Africa, and especially around youth unemployment. In some countries, that's up to about 60%, which is massive. But we are seeing that there is a wave of younger African entrepreneurs who are starting running new businesses, right? Small businesses, small organizations. Even if those are semi-formal, there is an opportunity to do that. So SMEs is most likely where the economies can grow the most. And then greenfields. So greenfields means we're starting something fully from scratch, right? So newly forming economies are excellent environments to test new products and services, right? Why can't a city in Rwanda become the next Silicon Valley, right? There's many examples of pockets of very interesting technology, very interesting new ways of doing things. And I even want to say that a lot of the best practices can actually come from Africa. I mean, if we think of best practices in South Africa, we know there's a few organizations that are known to be very good at supply chain and logistics. In Egypt, I know of many as well who actually take the leap, right, and do things from scratch. And I think starting completely new industries, doing things differently, new technologies, new best practices is really a very, very good opportunity in this continent. It's open for us to take. So that's just a couple of them, Yassine, that I wanted to mention in terms of some opportunities that we do see in the continent. And then that just leads me to a question. So please get your phones out again. Please go to the same link. We hope to see more than 10 people respond to this one. But when you think of, all these opportunities that exist within the continent, which ones of those excites you most, right? There's no right or wrong answer for this one. So is it A, the Africa Free Trade Agreement corridors? Is it digital leapfrog technology? Is it local manufacturing? Is it greenfields? Or is it youth or talent and skills? Which ones of those do you see the most upside in? And let me go into the poll. Again, you can, if you don't have it, you can use this QR code or the link in the chat. Let's see what excites you most. Which one excites you most, Shireen?
So I have to choose only one?
Let's say what's your most exciting one?
Okay, I'm thinking.
Okay, take your time. How about you, Yassine? Which excites you most?
I think localization. I think localization for me.
I think potentially localization and local manufacturing is probably where most of the economic benefit can come from.
Right, because it kind of spills into youth, spills into a whole bunch of different areas.
Exactly.
I chose greenfield industries because it's something new where we can make something happen.
Yes.
Because Africa is rich with many resources.
For sure.
Definitely.
For sure.
What about you,
Yeah.
Grant? What's your
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to say the local manufacturing as well, Yassine, but I think the step before that, which it's something that always concerns me in Africa, is the lack of skill, and how we can benefit and do that. I mean, I think the one benefit with manufacturing, if we think of really traditional manufacturing, like making components and pieces in a factory, the skill level required is not actually that high. So there is some benefit in that, but I think ultimately there is still a level of skill that is required. I mean, if we look at the labor market in Africa, it's generally unskilled labor, completely unskilled labor. So I think semi-skilled or lower level skill is really what we need. So I would tend to be on, the part that would excite me the most if we could get right is the talent and skills for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And happy. I mean, it looks like 40% of the audience is looking at that localization and local manufacturing. Happy to talk about that during the Q&A session.
Great, perfect. Well, interesting. Yeah. So thanks for all the feedback on this, everyone. So how do we do it, Yassine?
This is how we do it, Grant. And I think for the audience members, Grant and I just wanted to kind of take a step away from being consultants, and we wanted to take a more personal approach on how to navigate Africa effectively, not giving a framework or how to speaking consultant jargon. But firstly is building a local first strategy, right? So understanding the ecosystem before making big moves, and then building trust from the ground up. And then secondly is to adapt and listen, right? So don't just import global models, but tweak them for local reality. I'm really trying to guiding this into that discussion on localization. And then thirdly is to build and leverage relationships, right? So in many markets, informal networks can unlock a lot of formal opportunities. We've discussed that there's a lot of political tension on the continent. It's very important to understand like the people that you're making connections with and you're making contact with are in the right place at the right time. And then investing in local talent. So like Grant has also discussed, right? Skills matter as much as tools, and we need to be able to grow that capability, not just the infrastructure there, right? So really investing in local talent, because there's a multitude of case stories where really investing in those local communities and bringing that local talent through your organization pays dividends in multiple ways. And then partnering smart and giving back, right? So finding the right joint ventures, either that be with consultants like Grant and myself, or with consultants like Symbios-Consulting, making sure that your footprint benefits the communities and serving authentically, as well as your bottom line. So, if you embed these principles in your operations and you're not just entering the market for the sake of entering, you're building a long-lasting project moving forward. And I can attest that by engaging these local communities and by being authentic in the way that you're trying to approach your business, you'll be okay.
Thanks, Yassine. That does give me a little bit of hope. So I think just to create some key takeaways and call to action here, because we want you to do something with this. Even if those of you out there are not actually currently working in Africa, there could be future opportunities to do that. And really our intention here today was to give a snapshot of what the framework or what the market looks like, right? So we actually, myself and Yassine discuss this a lot, and we actually do some research on what's happening in Africa. And I think it's important to take some actions out of that. So Africa is risk and unrivaled growth runway. So it's both risk, also unrivaled growth. It's very extreme, right? It's across the board. You have to be agile as an organization, but there's also a lot of opportunity there. And the data shows that. The second is challenges are solvable with local insight, with the right technology, and with the human capital and best practice implementation. And just to pause on the best practice at the moment is, Yassine was 100% correct in saying we don't just want to copy and paste of the techniques that are used elsewhere in the world, because there is a lot of local flavor that is needed in Africa, but also there are best practices that we know work. So there are also concepts like sales and operations planning, or looking at ways in which you can develop a process flow that's best practice aligned, and things like that, like a cash-to-cash cycle or order-to-cash cycle, and these kinds of things. Very much works everywhere in the world, and it's just about giving it the twist that's local. So we have frameworks that exist out there. The Symbios-Consulting team will be very familiar with the SCORE framework, for example. It's frameworks like that you can pick and choose different best practices, metrics, processes, and really try to understand the maturity level of the supply chain that you operate within Africa, and find ways to improve on that. The other one, third one there, is that Middle East firms, which many of you might be at, do have geographic and cultural proximity into Africa. What we have seen, particularly I'd say in the last 50 years, has been investment heavily by organizations from Europe and the USA, right? Look at restaurant chains, look at retailers, look at products, look at all of those different things, brands. But as the Middle East and particular places like Saudi, UAE, etc. rise, we are seeing localized companies or local companies that are building very strong brands there. This actually reminds me, and Yassine did talk to the SAPEX conference that we both attended earlier this year, Huda Beauty, right? This is a very good example. They're not yet in Africa, but wouldn't this be a great idea for a company like that to start putting up roots in Africa before the rest of the market does? I mean, there's many established players there as well already, but those are from Europe and the US currently. So really, really good ways to think about that is, your market going into Africa and investing there. And then finally, if you are interested in learning more about market entry and all these aspects, Yassine has a very good background in Africa, has built a few businesses already actually as well, and very well knowledgeable on that. So Yassine, myself, or Symbios-Consulting would be great options for you to have a look at. So thank you for that. I just wanted to quickly mention before we take any questions, and hopefully there are one or two, is that we do actually have a free process maturity assessment that we can run for you. What this will do is give a sense of, and by the way, if you're not in Africa, you can still use it. We'll let you. But more particularly, if you have a supply chain in Africa or that touches Africa, this would be fantastic to do as well. But what we can do is assess the different process elements, across plan, order, source, transform, fulfill, return, and orchestrate, and really understand where you are currently, and then find ways to look at interventions or initiatives to improve it. So that's what we can offer you as a free gift for today. And then please do reach out to both Yassine and myself, and we have put our QR code LinkedIn profiles down below for you as well. So let's see if there's any questions or queries about Africa and supply chains. Shireen, I'm sure you have some questions for us.
I'm sorry, I have internet issue.
You must be in Africa, right?
No, I'm Riyadh, but on the
Okay.
road. So please repeat again.
I was just asking if you had any further questions or comments about African supply chains.
No. I really like the way you presented it. It made it very simple, but it has great potential, huge potential in Africa. Huge potential. Thank you, and people are applauding for you guys. Thank you very much.
Great. Are there any other questions from anybody?
I see there's
Comments?
a question in the chat. What are the potential opportunities to integrate blockchain in food supply chains? I think there's a plethora of opportunities, right? I think it's just the actual maturity of the technology and the company itself, right? I think there's so many nodes that you can insert blockchain along that kind of process of, when you say food value chain, is it the farmer? Is it the producer of the food? Is it the retailer of the food? Is it the restaurant that's buying the food from the retailer, or the consumer that's buying the food from the retailer? So
that's a great point, Yassine. And I think if I were to translate this into the African context, agriculture is a huge industry and also has a lot of potential in Africa. There's also a lot of focus globally around where does my food come from? Is it ethically sourced? Is it produce that has not used child labor, for example, to get it, and those kinds of things, as well as the environmental component of that, and how it's impacted on the environment. And I think that is one of the ways in which blockchain can help, because it creates a ledger of activity across the entire supply chain, not just within one company. And the other component of that is the payments. So I want to mention specifically payments, because payments has been quite contentious in Africa, and as many people know, in some countries it is difficult to get your payment. It is difficult to transact because money can't flow very easily between different entities. So I believe there's a two-pronged opportunity here. The one opportunity is related to the ledger aspect of that and the records keeping across the entire supply chain. And then the other relates to potentially using blockchain as a technology to do, like a Bitcoin, and to use different types of currencies and methods of transferring funds throughout that supply chain. So there's a lot of opportunity, but not all those opportunities are even in place in the developed world yet. So I think it could be one of those leapfrog moments for Africa potentially.
Yeah, it's very interesting, right? Because what level of granularity do you want to go down to, especially in agriculture, right? Do you link every single plant or every single vegetable, every component of that subcomponent into the ledger system? I think that'd be very interesting to explore.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. All right. Anyone else? I don't see the chat. I'm not sure if you can see it, Yossi.
Yeah, I can see it. I don't see any other questions here.
Okay. Great. Well, I'll hand back over then, I guess, to Shireen, and thank you so much for everybody's time today. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.